When it comes to EVE Online, every player wants to know the most effective tactic available. You want to know the meta. The meta controls everything. It determines what will and will not happen. Knowing the meta will alter your views, make you question your reality. It might even make you laugh. And now, you're part of it. You're watching The Meta Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special edition of The Meta Show for a number of reasons. First of all, one, this is episode 20 of our 4th season since I took over. So welcome to Meta Show 420. We're just going to kick it back and chill today. Now, you all are familiar with the fireside edition of the Meta Show. That's where we take the ties off and we sit by the fire and we sip a nice adult beverage and we talk about EVE Online. Well, you know what? It is too fucking hot to be sitting by a goddamn fire. So we're not going to do that. Except for Viktor. It's wintertime where he is, so it's okay. So we switched it up. We are no longer doing firesides in the summer, especially when it's 100 degrees outside. We are now doing poolside editions of the Meta Show. This gives Mark even greater excuse for not wearing a shirt.
Yes.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, man, it's so hot. It's so hot here right now. I'm fucking dying. I don't know about these other two, but it's very hot.
It's hot as balls here. It's just absolutely insane.
I know. Boys, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I should introduce them. So these are...
You should introduce them, since this is going to be a Wormhole show, and Mark is going to be in charge most of the time, except for when I'm taking a dump on CCP for their crappy dev blog they put out. But Mark is going to go and be the lead on this show. So you go ahead. Introduce our guest for us, because I'd love to hear it.
I got the vapors. Yeah, no, so these are my boys. These are a couple of my boys. This is Viktor Pvolman of Singularity Syndicate, and his boss, Cyrus Kuruch, also of Singularity Syndicate. Vic is a longtime FC in Wormhole space. He was with Hard Knocks for a long time, and I'm sure other groups. I don't know what other groups you were with, Vic. So
yeah, mainly Shekel Squad before.
That's right, you were with Shekel, and then also Cyrus is the C6 landlord parent, as it were. He is the CEO, long-standing CEO of Singularity Syndicate, who's one of the 2 preeminent powers in Wormhole space right now. Cyrus, I know you've done other things too, but that's like the thing anybody gives a shit about. So
I actually have not. SYNDE was my first and only Wormhole Corp. Before SYNDE, I did Anoms and HiSec.
Hell yeah.
I got tired of that. Literally went into the recruitment thingy in game. SYNDE was the first corp to come up, joined it, and now I'm here 7 years later.
Jesus, 7 years.
So to put this in perspective, you guys are number 1, right? There is no Wormhole group bigger than Singularity Syndicate right now, if I understand it.
I mean, if you go by pure characters, I don't think we're number 1, but I believe we have the most heartbeats of any corp in Wormholes, but I don't know.
Have, I think I saw when I was looking at Dotland, you guys had something like 450 characters in the corp, which, since this is a Wormhole corp, that's like 7 real people, right?
Yeah, it's like 7, maybe 8 on a good day.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I thought.
Yeah, but if you ask Laserhawks, it's literally 2 people, just the CEO and Artanis.
That's true.
There you
go. I think when we were looking at this the other day, they may be, I don't know if anybody's more active right now. Because groups, it's so wild, because like we were talking about this a couple weeks ago. Groups can ping up to like crazy numbers if they need to, but on average, and on a day-to-day basis, I don't think anybody's more active than Singularity Syndicate right now in Wormhole space.
Yeah.
How many actual bodies do you guys think you have, Cyrus?
Do you want the exact number?
If you've got it.
I have the exact number. It's at 136.
See, that's great. Jesus. That's huge. That's huge for you guys. That's way more than Mark's got.
Fuck off.
Mark, do you feel intimidated right now?
Shut the fuck up. No, leave me alone. This is not what this is about.
I'm just
Okay?
saying.
We're talking
just
about
saying.
Listen, we're talking about the very important wormhole spaceship fighting. We're not talking about my inadequacies. So shut the fuck up.
Okay, all right, got it. All right. Well, look,
Jesus.
before we get to the wormhole meta, because I'm really interested in hearing this, because we talk a lot on the CSM about different ships and stuff, and we actually had a good meeting on Thursday. We're talking about ship balance and a lot of different things. And I think from the average Nullsec perspective, we don't know much about what you guys do. Our philosophy is typically, if it's wormholes, you guys are flying Paladins or Nighthawks, and that's all we know about. And maybe some Leshaks once in a while, but that's it. So I'm interested to hear more of what you guys actually do on a daily basis. And I know Mark wants to talk about that stuff. But before we get there, let's do we had one little bit of CCP news. So we're going to pierce the corporate veil for a little while and talk about the developer blog that came out a couple days ago. Now, this was the dev blog that came out. I guess it was actually yesterday.
Yeah. It was
CCP Rattati wrote this, and I'll scroll through it. It's long.
Yeah.
It's really long. And you always think, well, wow, when you get a really long dev blog, this is great because we're going to talk about all the new stuff that's going to happen in the game. And no,
it was kind of disappointing. I understand the need for it. And CCP Rattati, for all the flack that he's caught over the last couple of years, I feel like it's still got a good head on his shoulders about the whole thing. But this was nothing. It was a whole lot of, this is what we've done. Cool. Congratulations. Anybody who plays the game knows what they've been up to. So there's not really a whole lot else going on in here. There was a shout out for me, which is cool.
Which was nice. I did appreciate the fact that
I
they
did too.
mentioned that you guys were the first to put Holy Roman Empire, which Turbo Feet
Yes.
of Glory is obviously a part of, was the first alliance to put any kind of skin on a structure, and they had a picture of it. There it is. It goes with the show theme today.
Yeah, it was
Poolside.
super
It's
cool.
very nice.
And then we lost it almost immediately because Evermark's it's way too expensive to for a group my size to keep their structures skinned. So
There you go.
sucks, but what are you gonna do?
Well, you guys just got to run more Evermarks missions, right? Like us.
Yeah.
Not everybody can be like Karma Fleet and have 60 million Evermarks in the bank or anything.
It's
But,
trash.
so they talked about like a handful of things in here that I thought were interesting. And I think one of the first things was that they noticed a significant uptick in the number of people joining corporations. And I mean, I appreciate that. And that's a good thing. But I don't know whether that's because people are coming back to the game or they're starting the game or because of anything that they did in here, And my biggest issue with this whole thing was, like, I don't have a problem with the whole let's pat ourselves on the back and remind everybody what we did. But when you see a developer, when they roll these things out and they call them like game director's letter, Viridian and beyond, everybody wants to hear about the beyond. What's the beyond? What are we going to do? What's going to happen next? What's next? And the entire next, they looked ahead to FanFest. Okay, that's a player event. That has nothing to do with what's in the game, what's going to be in the game. They looked along to the Alliance Tournament. Again, that's a player event. It's not anything that's going to be added to the game. And then so that they get in here and they show, here's the roadmap. And the roadmap is literally nothing that we haven't seen before. All they did was add delivered to a couple of these things that they had on there before. And I'm pretty sure they put the Eve beta, the Excel thing on twice now. I guess they want double credit for it. But live event, some PvE shit, and something we know nothing about.
Yeah, I think what's most disappointing about it too is that the graphics for the timeline I think have gotten better, but there's just less there. Somebody mentioned earlier in one of the discords that we've lost like 7 annual or periodic events that happen throughout the year. Some of these, the regular events that they're just not doing anymore. On top of a general lack of discussion about any kind of content coming up, it just makes the whole letter feel like it. I said going through the motions earlier, and it does feel a lot like that.
Yeah,
like
this is a check the box kind of thing, and at least what I expect they expect us to do, because we've been critical on the show over a number of years about communication, especially when they were going through their phase of not telling anybody anything about anything ever.
Yeah,
and then they started doing more of the talking. But this to me, I have to give Rattati and the team credit. This is a masterful example of writing a ton of stuff that tells people things they already know in a way that makes them feel, oh, this is nice. Look at all this stuff we did. But everybody's looking for what's next and like trying to tease out if there's any kind of information in here that's interesting or new. And there really wasn't. So I guess good job. You didn't make any mistakes. Nobody's going to get mad over this. Like I can't even really work up a lather about it, because it's like, okay, they wrote this. They didn't say anything new. They didn't really say anything that was bad or wrong, so I can't get mad at them. But man, I wish it feels like a missed opportunity. I wish we could have gotten a little bit more of an idea of what they're planning for November.
yeah,
Because I think players would be happy if they heard, hey, there's stuff coming, and here's where we're looking at going, and we're trying to get there. But that plane never really landed. The one thing I will say, on another note, they mentioned in here that more people are joining corporations and stuff, and I will say it does feel like, and I want to find out from you guys if you're noticing that in Wormholes, it does feel like more people are coming back that left, like our old friends are coming back that left, and we're seeing an uptick in the number of new people coming in. And if you just look at Reddit, and I hate using Reddit as a guide for anything, but if you look at Reddit, you've got like a dozen, how do I start Eve? Am I playing Eve right? Questions about bubbles, which is like, I mean, everybody knows what the fuck. What is cluster shutdown? Really? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Need advice on starting over. And then you look, you keep scrolling, and it's the same stuff. It's, are there folks that mine for a living is a question. And then getting back in and looking for a corp, and new player here died mining, returning player cap question. I mean, it's just, every other post on our Eve right now is about some new player thing or some returning player thing. And that's not a bad thing. I like it. It's good. It means it tells me that people are, ready to go, and that they're interested and they're back playing the game. And so I think that's interesting, and maybe that's a sign of something good. But anyway, that's enough of me talking. I want to hear from you Wormhole guys. So I'm just going to sit back and have a drink and let Mark take over.
Sure. I suspect, while we're on the subject, I suspect that a lot of the numbers going up is more alts than anything else. People find it easier to commit money or time to the game if they think the game is halfway decent. So if I think it's, there's a cycle of that happening where people are just, subbing more alts. But I mean, there's something to be said about that too, just to shout out another one of our homies, Specific Alduin from Hard Knocks. Was AFK for a while, and periodically would message me and ask if the game was decent again. And every so often I'd be like, we're working on it. And then not too long ago, he joined Cyrus's corp again and came back to the game. So it's anecdotal, but I don't know. Maybe maybe that's something. So anyway, so let's talk about heavy armor. So I wanted to, the reason I wanted to have this conversation in the first place and bring you guys on here is because, we're starting to get into the swing of the CSM campaign. And one of the things I've talked a lot about over the last couple of years is faxes and triage in Wormhole space. And I think what people don't realize is that the way that we use triage is a lot different than the way that Nullsecers in general use triage. And ignore my
You guys
cat.
don't use them to rep your ships?
No, to be fair, but the application is different. Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
all right, okay, I got
let's
it.
put it to you like this: I don't know what the average cost of a Nullsec fax is. Cyrus, what's the most? I think what would you say the average is of a fax that you guys have had on field over the last couple of months?
Anywhere from 10 to 90 bill. Depends on who we're fighting, where we are.
Are these fucking Dagons?
Jesus.
Jesus.
No, it was a lift. The last lift I lost was
Wow.
about 90 bill.
Why? So let's take before we answer the question of why does it need to be that way. Let's talk very briefly about when people say heavy armor. What people are talking about, so much of nullsec fighting is projection gameplay, right? And that was one of the biggest arguments about like Munins and these, other ships that had, one of the biggest complaints people have about like Roques because of, being able to plink at each other from crazy distances across a grid. And that's not generally done in wormhole space. Why? I'll ask you both this question. Why do you think it is more frequent for groups to engage in brawl? I mean, I think I know what the answer is. Groups to engage in brawling than in the kind of range gameplay you see in nullsec.
I guess Victor, you go first. I already talked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple. Like in wormholes, we're talking about pretty small numbers, right? And because of the isolated nature of wormholes, typically fights don't get escalated on by any third parties. And if I bring like 30, like very blingy amulet Lashaks, and you bring like some kidy range comp, you're simply not gonna break my Lashaks on the fax traps, right? And I can sit and bash your structure all day. You can blink away, but the only way you can kill me really is to bring your own brawly ships and come in close and brawl, right? So that's kind of how it started. And now it's basically like tradition almost, right? Like the Vermoners fight each other, they just brawl.
Well, and
I have on the screen a nullsec fax.
Yeah,
and
it
runs out at about 7 bill.
Yeah,
at least that's our goal with faxes. Is they're designed to soak up bullets so the Titans don't die. So they're supposed to be cheap. They should be a lot cheaper than that. We used to be able to get them under 3 billion, but not anymore. Anyway,
it would be nice if they were a lot cheaper than that. The other thing too about speaking of before we get away from it, speaking of what you said, Vic, the other thing too is that when you jump through a wormhole, you're at 0. I mean, unless somebody is setting up unless somebody is at range already, very infrequently I think you're going to see groups like willingly engage another group that's like at 60 or at 70 off a hole, unless they think that they can close the distance without feeding, right? So when we've talked in the past about heavy armor, and this is the reason why this comes up whenever we talk about triage, is there was a meta for the longest time of they called this sort of peak high-end tier wormhole fighting between a lot of these larger groups in C5 space and C6 space, where groups would field large groups of armor battleships, armor command ships, armor battle cruisers.
What kind of armor battleships were you guys flying?
I mean, depends on the era, but in the last 3 to 4 years, it's mainly been Lashaks. I mean, of course, during the Paladin era, everybody was flying Paladins or Golems if they were fighting shields, just because Marauders were busted. But other than that, Lashaks, you've got your utility battleships like Balgorns and Vindicators, and sometimes you have people throwing wild cards with, I don't know, Artie Abaddons or whatever. But TFIs.
The old Artie Abaddons, those were fun.
Yeah,
we used those for a little while, and
that's the.
I'm just gonna pop in with questions, so
you're fine. It's good. It's fine. So what you would have is you'd have these two fleets engaging, on top of each other, and both sides would bring triage. And you do that for a bunch of different reasons. One, you can limit the amount of mass, right? Everything in wormhole space is about mass efficiency, right? How much DPS can you get through a hole before to compare to the other guy, right? So you're trying to fit as much DPS through with the mass that you have allowed and the numbers you have available, and then at the very end when you're about to roll the hole or crit it, you would jump the triage through. So you have that through on top of everything else. You get in, you get on grid, and then you fight.
So you guys would bring triage in on an like an eviction or as an attacker. You guys would bring.
Not just on an eviction. No, not well. Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. Because having the triage there limits the numbers that you have to commit to Logi, right? Would you rather have a single pilot in an Apostle, right, or 12 pilots in Guardians? Yeah. So, I guess the question then became, what happened to triage? Because it's not as frequently seen anymore. There are a couple of groups who do it. Cyrus, Vic, your guys' group fields triage pretty frequently. Other groups like Hawks will field triage with some frequency, but outside of that, it's not seen so often. And I just for the sake of having discussion about it, what changed with faxes that they're not seen so frequently anymore?
Yeah, so the main thing that changed is at some point CCP decided to like we used to use injector wrap faxes, we call them, right? So we use mainly Nasus with all the mid slots filled with cap injectors, right? And this allowed you, because wormhole fights tend to be very heavy on newts, you'd have a lot of Balgordons, ships like that. So this allowed you to, even under full newt pressure, to still repair, because you could activate your cap injector and your remote repair or local rep on the same game tick, basically, right? And it would still go off, right? So um, at some point, CCP decided to remove the ability for faxes to have more than one, I think, capital cap injectors, right? And this basically made that strategy impossible. And yeah, like at that point, people figured out that faxes you can still use them, right? But like Cyrus said before, right, like he lost a 90 bill fax. Like at this point, you need to bling them, like officer models, everything, right? So they recharge enough to like be able to still repair under very heavy newt pressure. Most groups just don't have the money or don't think it's worth the risk to field a 90 bill fax on an average fight, right? So that's the problem right now.
So what you mentioned regen faxes, Cyrus, and I'll just have you explain this one because you're sort of the local expert on the issue. What is when people talk about regen faxes versus injector faxes? What are they talking about?
So we'll start with what we had before. So injector faxes, like Viktor said, is you'd have your mid slots filled up with cap injectors, and using cap injectors and good timing, you could either run your remote reps or your local reps. With regen faxes, the entire point, or what you're getting all your cap from cap regen. And usually that's done either by filling the low slots with cap regen if it's a shield fax, or the mid slots if it's an armor fax. And the whole point is just to have enough regen to, one, be able to rep yourself and or the fleet, and two, be able to withstand the newt pressure from the enemy fleet. Now, the difference between those is that injector faxes had less sustained power than regen faxes. So because you're limited by the cycle time and the reload time of your cap injectors, your maximum rep output was capped by how fast those mods could cycle. Whereas regen faxes have stronger output, both locally and outgoing, but as soon as they're capped out to 0, it's over. You can't do anything.
Right.
So,
and there's something to be said too. I feel like we have talked about this internally before about the skill ceiling of both types of this kind of gameplay, right? Where regen faxes, for better or worse, you still have to do all the motions, going through the motions of repping the fleet, right? Of being aware when people are being primaried, of following broadcasts. But beyond that, and making sure that you're running your own reps and managing heat, there's not a whole lot else to do, because you don't have to manage your own cap. The cap just regens what it's going to be. And if it's, if you get past a certain point and it's not regening enough anymore, you're shit of luck, right? Whereas with injector faxes, that was not the case. Viktor?
And if I recall correctly, I feel bad for you guys, because if I recall, and I was on the CSM when all this stuff was going down, I'm pretty sure the whole reason why CCP nerfed adding the 3 cap boosters on a ship was all because of triple Ancil Rourke walls. That was the thing. But I guess instead of just making it just about, ancillary shield boosters, they turned it into everything. And that kind of screwed you guys. Well, yeah, whereas once again, wormholes become collateral damage to a nullsec problem that they were trying to fix.
What I always heard was that they were nerfed because they didn't want triage to be able to cap back up to jump cap so easily after dropping, since you could effectively, with a full rack of injectors, you can get back to jump cap really, really quickly, right? So you could jump out pretty fast. But yeah, that is to Vic's point, and Cyrus mentioned this as well. There's a difference in the amount of money that you have to put into a regen fax, like some of these kind of Apex triage that we've seen more recently, compared to injector faxes, which can be relatively inexpensive for what they are. because you can just, you can compensate for skill, compensate for money with skill and quick reaction times on your boosters, right? So
let me ask you guys this. So when it comes down to it, like, it sounds, I mean, these battles seem, if you're bringing triage in, they seem very stationary. Is that really how is this just like a prize fight where you got two heavyweights just standing there punching each other in the face till it's over? Is that how it is? Like, do you guys do any maneuver type stuff, or?
It's different, right? Because I think Nullsec fights are very much about maneuvering and positioning, right? Whereas Wormhole space fight positioning has a huge part as well, of course. But I think the main aspect there is like proper utilization of E-War. Like, people are multi-boxing, triple boxing, different roles of ships. E-War ships have a huge impact, right? The looting ships have a huge impact. And it's not just like shooting each other, right? And just kind of like who punches harder wins. It's very much this game of choosing the proper targets. These brawls can last for up to an hour, right? Like, usually.
Yeah.
And whoever kind of like executes their comp better wins, if that makes sense. Instead of positioning, right? If that makes sense.
It's less about, at least in Nullsec fights, it tends to be which FC makes the fewest mistakes. And it sounds like for you guys, it's more about who plans better in the beginning, and who can get their who can get their guys there in the right place. And
yeah, exactly, right. I think the individual players matter a lot more as well, to some extent, right? Like, it's not just the FC making the calls. I think and the high end of the shack meta, we would have in like maybe 30 people on comms. We would have like 5 different anchors, 3 or 4 different shot callers, because we'd have 3 or 4 different wings for like different damage, right? Different targets, right? Like, I don't know, 10 E-War ships, stuff like that, right? So it's a lot more complicated of a fleet instead of feeling like, I don't know, 50 mutants and 20 scimitars.
I got to give you guys credit, because I'll tell you this right now. In a Nullsec fight, if we knew that one of the faxes on grid was a 90 bill fax that was full of purple stuff, that's all anybody would shoot at. How do you get these guys to pay attention and do the right thing? Because I can imagine if you're fielding a 90 billion ISK lift or something, that thing is so brick tank that you could have 40, 50 battleships shooting at it. It's not going to die. So how do you keep guys from doing stupid shit?
Yeah, Cyrus, how many Balgorns did your lift tank the other day?
It started off with 12, just doing okay. Jesus. Then they brought 2 more, and slowly over about half an hour, they took it down. But they didn't even need to really shoot it, honestly. Once you had 14 Balgorns on it, the cap eventually just went to 0. But to answer your question, Brisc, the fax that Mark is talking about, I think it was tanking 80 cold, so 40 Leshaks.
Yeah. So, but it's not just about, like, when you're engaging like that, you are assuming like it becomes a question of who can kill who faster, right? Because if you immediately go for the triage, what that means is that the
other side's going to whittle you down. They're going to hit your damage and knock those guys out.
You have to be, focused on. I guess this is a good question for you guys too. In terms of schools of thought, right? Is it better to go for the triage first, or wait until you've cleared DPS, you've cleared some of these support ships? Or is it just a matter of Bushido, right? Don't go for the triage until everything else is dead.
I think both in a way, right? I think in general, usually it's not the best call to go for the triage first. Of course, it depends on how the triages fit. I've personally have seen quite a few fights where I knew that I could kill the triage whenever I wanted, but I decided not to, right? Because killing their ships and having a longer fight is more fun. So yeah, sometimes there is a bit of Bushido.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the current meta, right, with these regen faxes, unless you have the nude pressure to cap the triage out, it's almost always the better call to just kill their fleet. And once the triage is left on his own, you figure out a way to kill him at that point.
Yeah. So that's something else we've talked about before in the past too, and this is something that gets brought up every so often, is this idea of combat refitting for triage, and the ability for triage to refit their ship, while they are in the process of repping ships that have weapons timers, which you can't do currently, right? If you rep a ship that has a weapons timer, it gives you a timer, and you can't refit while you've got a timer, right? But there was a time previously, back during the age of triage carriers where that was the case. What is appealing for groups who are engaging in these kind of fights for the ability to do something like that?
So the nice thing about that era was you had, well, I think I should start off with some of the negatives of today's regen faxes.
Mhm.
If you don't have enough newt pressure, you will not stop the fax from repping. Whereas during the inject era, if you could get the fax to 0 and you could force mistakes from the fax pilot, either you fake a primary or you make him miss an inject cycle, you could force errors and kill ships. During this regen era, it's a lot harder to force those mistakes because he doesn't have to time things properly. And then if you go back to the triage carrier era, they were a lot weaker, both in terms of tank and cap, than today's faxes. And you could force mistakes by either making him think, the fax pilot or the, I guess, triage carrier pilot, that he's going to be the primary. So he would refit for, let's say, tank, so that he can tank the incoming DPS. And then all of a sudden he becomes the newt primary and he doesn't have the regen to handle incoming damage, or he doesn't have the regen to start repping his fleet, or vice versa. You have him fit for regen because he thinks that the fleet is in danger, and then you focus on him and he doesn't have the tank to tank anymore. So during that era, even if you didn't have, let's say, the newt pressure, you could still force mistakes based on how well he could read the fight and how well he could refit accordingly.
Right.
You don't have that anymore. Injector faxes were a nice, I guess, similarity to that kind of mind games that you had to play with the fax pilot, but we don't have that now either. You just have a binary. Can you newt out the fax? Yes, no. Do you have enough DPS to break through fax reps? Yes, no. If the answer to both those questions are no, then you've got very few solutions left.
So I mean, it sounds to me like the bad part is the answer to both of those situations is bring more people, which is not something you guys like to hear, right? Because that's obviously a limiting factor.
A lot of times you can't. I mean,
that's what I mean. That you can't,
right.
Like trying to get the the ships in, trying to get the guys in. If you don't have a hole with enough mass, you're not going to be able to do it. And then there's no situation where you can take that fight because you're not going to win, right?
Correct. And
that sucks.
To Cyrus's point, that was the difference, right? Where in days gone by, you could force mistakes from a triage pilot because the triage pilot had to have a certain level of skill to be able to work effectively, right? And that is no longer the case because he's right. It's a binary. Either you can break the fax reps, break through fax reps, or you can newt out the fax. And if you can't do either of those things, then the fax is you just have to either disengage or find another way to win. Which brings us back a little bit to another thing that's kind of more prevalent. One of the things you can do to deal with triage reps is to move something out of triage range. Cyrus, what's the current Boosh meta like in Wormhole space? Asking for a friend.
A lot of people really like a technique known as spearfishing or hooking. In that technique, you use 2 command destroyers with what is it called? Micro jump field generators.
Mm-hmm.
You activate the first one to get the 2 destroyers into range of a target, be it, either the enemy's Logi or the enemy's DPS or whatever, a target you want to kill. And you activate the second command destroyer such that a second or 2 after the first one goes off and you've landed at your target, the second command destroyer also finishes cycling its mod. And now the target is 100 kilometers away from where it was before. And if your Boosh pilot is good and he knows how to aim his command destroyers, that ship is going to end up in the middle of your fleet, 100 kilometers away from the triage.
I love the fact that is part of your guys' meta now, because that was my bread and butter when I started flying in Nullsec. We used to do, we called it snatch. And we would do that stuff all the time. And I mean, if you look at my kill board, I think the number 2 or 3 ship on my kill board still is the Magus. I haven't flown a Magus in 5 years. But we did so many freaking snatch fleets that we would grab guys and do all that kind of stuff. It was just it's so much fun, and it's so freaking annoying for the people that are getting spearfish that they just it's crazy. So I'm glad that that's a thing. But I mean, you can do that once or twice, but there are ways around it. Like you can have everybody in the fleet scram each other. If they're not moving around, then you're not going to get booshed. But so my big question here on this are, the faxes sound overpowered, or at least they kind of seem to be the make or break in these fights. How many faxes typically do you need per, number of subcaps to be able to stay on grid? Because I mean, I would think even at least the way that we fit ours, you have maybe 2 or 3 remote reps on a fax, and that's good for 2 or 3 ships at a time. How many of these are you guys fielding typically, and how are these triage guys able to keep up?
It's just one fax usually, right? It's also like you're limited to almost 3 capital ships per high-class wormhole.
Okay.
And I mean, traditionally, back in the day, it used to be 1 fax, 2 dreadnoughts, right? And the rest sub-capital ships. Nowadays, people will bring maybe 1 fax and the rest battleships, right? But yeah, typically 1 fax is enough to repair your whole fleet. 2 is overkill. There's no point in bringing 2.
So are you bringing any other, like any Guardians or any other kind of Logi, or is it just straight up the fax is it, and everybody else is in DPS?
Yeah, it depends, right? It changes. People have different comps. It's changed over time, right? With different metas and different balance patches. I think at the moment, some people would like to bring like a few extra Nestors, just have like a little bit of extra reps, right? Or maybe to rep against like spark bomb damage and stuff, right? Guardians are very popular, but they will fit them with just remote capacitor, right? Because a lot of the ships that people use now require cap pilot checks and stuff.
You're
right?
gonna need cap transfer. Yep, got it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing is, like you were saying, you may need multiple triage. 1 triage is enough, but again, because of this regen error, there's almost like this break point where if you don't spend enough, then the triage is almost on it's like on a timer. Like either it's going to run out of cap or it's just going to die. And then once you've passed that threshold, then the fax is an extremely durable target that's going to stand up to the pressure that you're going to put it up to.
So here, I want to take one step back real quick, because since we're talking about heavy armor, the question then becomes, why heavy armor? Like, what's the appeal of armor over like a heavy shield fleet? And we've seen heavy shield fleets in the past, fleets of Barghasts, fleets of Scorp navies. Even more recently, we've seen fleets of golems. Rest in peace, Marauder meta, or rest in piss.
Rest in piss, I would say.
Rest in piss.
Right.
Yes, of course. Thank you. So what was the appeal back in the days gone by?
It's got to be cap, right? Is it cap?
Yeah, it's a multitude of things, right?
Okay.
As well. So you don't require cap to keep armor up, but also armor comes typically get a lot of E-War mid slots, right? Which are very useful. And back in the day, you didn't have the shield amulets, right? You didn't have the Nirvanas,
Right.
so
That's true.
you wanted more tank, right? So you only could go armor with amulets.
That's true.
Got it. I mean, that makes sense.
There is something to be said too, as well, since we're talking about, there are plenty of heavy armor fights that happen nowadays that don't have triage on grid. Since a lot of groups will, don't feel like it's worth it to drop 30 bill in a fax on a fight that they don't feel confident about, or don't feel there's enough pressure for them to feel something like that, or they just don't think it has good replacement value. So groups will bring a lot of we mentioned earlier 12 Guardians, right, or 4 cap Guardians and a bunch of Nestors. There isn't a shield battleship replacement for the Nestor, which is problematic, right? So what does that do to heavy armor fleets compared to heavy shield fleets at the apex level? If you were to take triage out of it entirely, what difference does that by itself make?
It's a pretty big difference, right? Like in general, when you're that limited on the amount of ships you can bring, the amount of characters, you just want to maximize the stats on every possible ship. And like Nestors with Cap Guardians are simply a lot more efficient than Basilisks as far as reps per minute goes. I still think that a big limiting factor in shield comps right now is still, even with Nirvana as their buffer, is just a little bit too low in wormholes outside of pulsars for the real big fights, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, generally speaking, yeah, it's a big factor.
Yeah.
So, and you guys all, I mean, that's the other thing that I keep in mind that I think is weird for the Nullsec audience. Like, you guys all pick your home holes based on the wormhole effects in there, right? What do you tip? Is it all pulsars? Is that what everybody wants, or what's the meta now for where you live?
I know, Cyrus. Why'd you guys move into Zion?
Politics is the short
I was
answer.
gonna say, other than it was free.
I mean, every group has different tastes, I guess you could say, on what they like. I mean, if I want to go over it briefly, there's 6 different types of wormholes. There's the vanillas, which have no effect, like every system in K-space, other than, the ones with weather. And then there's pulsars that give a bonus to shields and a malice to armor. Wolf Riots, which is what we live in, that's bonus to armor, malice to shield. You've got a cataclysmic variable that gives a bonus to remote reps and a malice to local. Black holes that make things go fast, makes it hard to slow down, and missiles are stronger. And you've got magnetars, which increase damage but reduce application, and red giants that make explosions bigger and overheating very dangerous, to put it mildly.
Yes.
And honestly, people will just pick holes based on what their corp culture is. The holes that everybody seems to love are obviously red giants, but some groups are weird and different, and they choose
as they should. Thank you. But it makes a difference, right? When you're talking about, this is actually a good point to bring up too. So when we talk about fights, in the difference between how fights happen between wormhole space and K space, right? K space fights happen usually because there is a target, right? There's some asset in space that has been targeted, that becomes an objective, and then 2 groups will a group will try and kill the target or engage the target, whether that target is a super outratting, whether it's a Rourke with a mining fleet or whatever. There's a target somewhere, and 2 groups will engage on the target. They'll come from wherever they want to come from. They'll jump down their Anzaplex networks, and they'll get to where they want to be, right? Whereas, hey, you found the facts. Look at that.
So so the guys linked the facts. I mean, I got to say, Cyrus, you have some big brass balls, my friend. This is fucking great. Like, the idea of throwing a 30 bill fax in covered in purple. This is one of the regen fax fits. That is badass. I love it.
Yeah, fax is pretty gangster. Great. Did you ever get those purples back, by the way? They were selling back to you? You're muted, by the way.
Sorry. It's okay. They sold me back the reps. I believe only 1 or 2 of the lows dropped, and they did sell those back to me. So right. I'm happy, because at the end of the day, building the price is not the issue. It's the availability of the mods. If I can't find the mods, I can't build it.
Yeah.
But for some context, we were fighting 2 separate groups that, they were going to team up to fight us, and they outnumbered us. So I said, well, either we can say, sorry, can't fight, or we could pull out all the stops and see if we can make something happen. So we said, fuck it, let's make something happen.
Yeah. And I guess that's the difference, right? Is that when we were talking about groups that engage each other, a lot of times wormhole fights happen because of proximity, right? If you roll into somebody, or you're connected through a chain that doesn't have too many jumps to somebody, you're not obligated to fight, but people will give you a weird look if you don't. So, like in this situation, those 2 groups were they connected to each other?
Look at how many Balgorns they brought. I mean,
there's a lot of Balgorns.
Dear Lord.
Yeah, so those 2 groups, they actually shared a C5 mutually. So both of those groups live in low-class wormholes that have a C5 static, and it just so happened that the C5 system that we fought in was connected to both of their homes. So we said, okay, well, we're connected to that C5. You guys can both come out of your homes into that C5, and we'll have a fight. And the rest is on the screen right now.
Many Balgorns as they brought DPS. That's nuts. Like, yeah, I guess that's if that's the meta, you got to do it, right? That's crazy.
This is not related to anything that we're talking about right now, Brisc, but go back to the BR real quick and pull up the Marshal that was killed on the SYNDE side.
Let me see if I can get
You want to talk about gangsters? This one was pretty cool. I'll go back. You clicked it wrong. Go back. Click the image.
You have to click the ship itself.
That's
There you
crazy.
go. Yeah, look at that guy.
30 billion ISK, Marshall.
Yeah, oh yeah.
All officer smart bombs. I wonder if he got it from that guy in high sec.
This is
No,
pretty
no,
gangster.
those were
Oh,
all
they're different. These are
legit smart
brocars.
bombs.
These are legits. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's absolute. And everything else abyssal too. So you know flat out that, you know, with all the abyssals on here, that was way more than a 30 billion ISK. Marshall, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So
you guys got two guys with giant. I mean, you got more than one guy with giant balls and SYNDE. I love it. It's great.
But that's
awesome.
That's
the money.
That's the I mean, you don't die. You can't take it with you, right?
Right.
Exactly.
That's my philosophy.
So
what's the point of having these ships if you're not going to use them? Why are you going to bling them out if you're never going to take them out of your freaking undock? That's ridiculous.
Honestly, seriously.
Do it.
So the question then becomes when you're talking about these groups engaging, and I know I've been making this point for like 5 minutes. So much of it has to do with how close you are to each other, right? Are you going to take triage 6 jumps down chain to fight somebody, or are you going to try and stay locally, right? And does it matter? Does the price of it make a difference when you're moving a fleet that big down a chain that you're not sure about how much mass there is along the way, right? So I guess my question for you two is, and this is maybe more of a Cyrus thing, does it matter to you when you're talking about taking a fight, not just the weather of the hole in between you, but how much you know, or I guess rather, how much do you know before you jump into a wormhole about the condition of the hole, who's in there, who all might be connected, who all is down chain, the works. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, so short answer, that fax, I had to jump it through 3 different wormholes to get it to the fight, which I normally wouldn't do. And the reason for that is there's a certain amount of unknown and entropy when it comes to wormhole connections. I guess again, quick crash course. Every wormhole has a set amount of mass that it spawns with, but it also has a plus minus 10% on how much mass it spawns with that's just randomly generated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the only hole that you know, I guess, roughly has the mass of its type, or that you roughly know how much mass it has, is your static, because that's the hole that you roll. Anything after that, you have no clue what's gone through that hole. For example, any of the holes in between our home and where that fight happened, somebody could have moved a cap through there and we would never know, because a single cap is not enough to affect the stability of a extra large hole. So if we miscalculate or we just don't know, right? We jump, let's say 3 battleships through a hole and all of a sudden it's destabbed or it goes crit, or we're like, well, shit, what do we do now? Like, we can't have this fight. Mm-hmm. So most groups try not to bring faxes more than 1, maximum 2 jumps down a chain, just because once you get that far, there's just way too much unknown and your fleet gets stranded or it gets broken up, and you don't have a fight. If you just brought subcaps, you probably would have been fine. Mm-hmm. And 2, if it gets stuck in a sticky situation, you've got no way to save that ship.
Right. So would you say, so when you saw that this was a 3 jump minimum to get to the guy's holes that you're going to go fight, did you realize that was, I'm losing the ship, it's going to be a suicide run? Or did you think there was a chance that you guys were going to get that out?
I didn't go into it thinking we had 0 chance to win. I'll put it that way. I knew it was going to be very tough because, 1, we had, roughly speaking, about 3 billion tons of mass to work with, because that's the mass of any single wormhole connection. Those 2 groups had 3 billion mass each, because each of them had a 3 billion mass connection to where we were going to fight. So I knew from the beginning we were at a disadvantage there, but if I told them, hey, you guys need to go through 3 billion to fight us, I had a feeling that perhaps they would be less inclined to take the fight, and we were just like, fuck it, why not?
Yeah.
But we have a fax, and a very good fax. I'm sure it'll see us. It's seen us through worse. Hopefully it'll see us through this one. Didn't do it this time. Oh well.
So I know we're coming up on time here, but I want to kind of bring it all back around, because something else that is worth mentioning when we're talking about heavy armor and the amount of money, because we've talked so much about how expensive things are, right? How expensive triage is, how expensive these battleship fleets can be, the kind of resources that people are putting into their doctrines just to stay competitive. Because Viktor made the point earlier, whenever you're limited by mass, you're trying to be as not just as efficient in terms of how much how much mass you can move around, but what you can get out of it too, right? You want to get the most out of each ship. So when you talk about apex doctrines and these apex fights, that's what it means, right? You have this much amount of mass, you have to squeeze every little bit out of it that you can in order to take the best fight possible, knowing that there are 50 different conditions that might affect what happens along the way, right? So considering how much force or like how much preparation has to go into it, how much foresight groups have to have, how much money has to be invested, is it worth saying, in your opinion, both of you, that this, I don't know, justifies the cost of blue loot in the year of our Lord 2023? Or is blue loot too expensive? What do you think, Cyrus?
I would say that the battle reports speak for themselves. I don't want to, I guess, put down nullsecers or anything, because I've never lived there. I have no context onto the day in the life of a nullsecer, but I can look at the BRs, and the average ship on a nullsec BR is like maximum 500 mil, usually around 200 to 300. And from what I've heard in terms of what it takes to make the money to build those ships, or for a member or person, a line member there to build those, to acquire one of those ships, if they were more, it would be more and more difficult and fleets wouldn't get so big.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you look at the Wormhole BRs, the average ship is easily 1 billion, maybe 2 billion ISK, and every member or every person of the org that's fueling those ships is doing it with a smile, without too much stress on the ability for them to do it. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
But the only reason they're able to do that is because of the amount of income there is from blue loot. If blue loot income was lower, then most groups would be forced to make their doctrines cheaper, because you can make an expensive doctrine that performs extremely well, but if only 10% of your membership can afford it, you can't make a fleet with only 10% of your membership.
Yeah.
So the cost and the size and the composition of fleets and wormholes are a reflection of the income in wormholes. If the income was to go down, then the fleets would reflect that, either by becoming cheaper or by becoming smaller. But it would be unsustainable to make those fleets happen with less blue loot.
Viktor,
I think the one thing that's different for you guys, and I think it's just by the nature of the space, is you take the blue loot, you convert that into the S that you use to buy these very blingy ships, and then you go fight with them. And 100 billion S fax is the apex, because you guys don't have supers and titans. So for us, the thing is, when Nullsec gets ISK generation buffed, we turn it into supers and titans, and you guys turn it into expensive capital ships like lifts, not really caps, but like expensive triage and expensive battleship fleets. Mm-hmm. We don't do that. Like, that's the thing. And our whole goal is keep the numbers as small as possible to make sure we have enough that we can get people in those ships, that our SRP programs, where we are, paying guys back for PvPing, that they are able to be reimbursed in a way that it's not killing their wallets, because they're not making as much money as you guys are.
Right.
So if anything, I would love to say buff Nullsec wealth generation, but the problem is we have different things to spend it on than you guys. So I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where you're going to see Nullsec guys flying in billion-esque average ships, because if our guys have that kind of ISK, they're going to be spending it on blingy super caps and titans and things like that, rather than on blingy battleships. But which is a shame, because I like flying blingy stuff. And if anybody knows, I die all the time, and I'm always in crazy shit, which is one of the benefits that I have to being me, because I'm going to get shot first. So at least if somebody's shooting me, I want them to feel like I killed Brisc. That was a good time. I love it when Brisc is on grid, because he's going to die first and I won't. But then he's going to be in some blingy thing and they're going to shoot him anyway. It's kind of like part of the persona. It's fun.
Yeah.
But you just don't see that unfortunately, you know, in Wormhole. So if we were, that's why I tease Mark, and I will tease you guys all the time about nerfing blue loot and things like that. But that's bullshit. I don't want to nerf you guys. There's no reason to do that. I like the fact that you guys are willing to throw away these ships that have, I mean, you're not really throwing them away, but you're willing to throw them into a fight that are that expensive. And we laugh. I mean, Asher and I were laughing about it on the show a couple of weeks ago. You know, you look at a Wormhole BR and you guys lose 200 billion S, but it's only like 10 ships lost. That's cool. I think that's fun. You know, I would much rather, you know, buff K-Space wealth generation so that we can go out there and do things like that.
Right.
And make sure that people are not complaining so much that we have supers and titans and we actually use them, because God knows my super has not undocked since last year when we were doing stuff, and my titans are used for bridging. That's it. It sucks. Anyway.
I think it's interesting that, you know, when we talk about, you know, these kind of doctrines and how expensive things get, do you, Vic, and you were at one point one of the FCs for perhaps the most influential single group that has ever lived in Wormhole space, with maybe a single other exception. Do you feel like this sort of top tier, you know, Apex maxed out, you know, into the line kind of fighting is somehow baked into the DNA of Wormhole space? Like, is this the platonic ideal of what this should be? Like, is this the end result of the conditions that, you know, Wormhole space gives us? Like, you know, you have so many different factors. You have, you know, you're limited by mass on how much you can move around. You have this huge income source that, you know, groups will fight over, and groups will, you know, fight fiercely to defend. You know, and you have people who move out here specifically because either they want to try something different or they want to get away from a certain play style. Is this what it was always going to be? Like, are these Apex doctrines, this Apex way of playing, is this what it is? Is this it? I guess is the question. Like, is this the, you know, was Wormhole space always going to be this?
I think so, right? I think that Wormhole space provides a unique set of conditions, right? Where you cannot really get escalated on. You're fairly isolated in fights, right? You're limited on numbers, et cetera, that allow this kind of behavior where people feel comfortable dropping, you know, 3 or 4 billion ISK ships. Because if I lose my 3 or 4 billion ISK ship, I lost it in usually a relatively fair fight, right? And I risk someone like, you know, shadowing in 100 dudes and killing me. That's no fun, right? Whether, I guess, like the meta, the way it is right now, is actually the most ideal meta, or whether everybody just kind of does it because everybody does it, it's hard to tell, because people haven't really tried a lot of things other than brawling, right? When it comes to Wormhole fights, I think people have tried, but very in a very limited capacity. So I think it's also very much I think Wormhole spaces is very tight community, because it's also a small community, right? There's relatively few players in Wormhole space. Everybody knows each other, really. All the groups know each other, all the players know each other. And all these brawls are also like, you know, why do we fight without an objective, right? In a way, you're fighting for honor. So we call them honor brawls, right? But like for yeah, like, you know, because you guys want to fight.
Who's
and
better? You guys want to know who's got the better group? Who's got the better
exactly.
I mean, that's good competition.
I mean, and the other thing too is how much you can shit talk the other guy, right? Like, I don't want to dance
part
around
of the fun, right? I mean, come on.
So
yeah, for sure.
There you go.
Well,
guys,
all right,
ladies and gentlemen, we have hit the end of the show. I would like to thank Viktor and Cyrus for coming on and talking about this. It's very interesting, and I think, at least from our audience's perspective, and I know we had a lot of guys from Wormholes here today, so thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. This was very informative, very interesting for me. I'd be interested to hear from you guys at some other point when we want to talk about changes and things like that, where you think the facts meta needs to go. Like what should be done about it. We'll try to come back and do another show and talk about that type of stuff. I assume, you know, that'll be something that your CSM is going to want to talk about eventually on the show later, right? Someday, maybe.
You talk to that guy.
Yeah, we don't want to talk to that guy. But anyway. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Meta Show for July the 29th, 2023. I'm Bruce Rubal, joined alongside Mark Resurrectus, Cyrus Kuruch, and Viktor Pvolman from SYNDE were here with us today. Next week, we are taking the week off. I'm taking Mrs. Brisc to a winery. We're going to have some fun. So we're going to have a weekend break in the summertime. We will see you back the week after for the Meta Show. Thank you all for joining, and you stay classy, New Eden.